We are captives of perception. Our lives, behaviors, activities, all stem from perception. What we see, how we see, how we perceive, how we look at the world dictates how we relate to the world. By giving back to the world, extending to the world our very behavior. But all that requires some backing, some type of a foundation, an understanding or lack of, which Lord Buddha calls ditthi, views or wrong views. So this week we continue on the Brahmajāla Sutta. And this week I believe it's going to be the fourth week of the Brahmajāla. And I want to explore with you as we delve deeper into this amazing ocean of a sutta, but not with the intention of simply expositing or explaining or trying to clarify what the content is separate from our lives, because that really is not the objective of the Dhamma that Lord Buddha taught. Everything Lord Buddha taught was and is supposed to be about us and how we live our lives. So we and our lives have everything to do with the Dhamma. To understand the Dhamma, because what is necessary is an understanding of the perceptions that we hold valuable, which dictate the direction of the life we lead. Because ultimately what is happening is all throughout samsara, as we see in the world around us, people are victims to their perceptions, and specifically in repeating certain behaviors that are detrimental for our well-being, which Lord Buddha calls suffering, dukkha. So the whole point of having the Dhamma be introduced by the Tathagata is to relieve us from that suffering. That is what we mean by freedom. That is what vimutti means. Liberation, awakening, release. From what? From the pattern of repeating the cycles of rebirth, equaling freedom from suffering. But that requires us to not just develop a new perspective, but to be able, first of all, to see the position of wrong view and how important it is for either the detriment or the well-being of our lives, to perpetuate suffering or to release ourselves from suffering. So the pattern has to be seen for what it is. The Dhamma is all about looking around us to see, hey, we've done this before, haven't we? That realization requires us first to see things for how and what they are really, and not what we tell ourselves that they are. This is extremely important. Otherwise, the Dhamma, as you've heard me say during the last few weeks of this Brahmajāla Sutta, the Dhamma itself could be turned into a wrong view. Now, this might sound very controversial for very, many people who have a certain perspective about the Dhamma, how it's supposed to be. And that's the danger. That's what I'm saying. Of treating the Dhamma as another wrong view, as another dogma, as another way of this is how it's supposed to be, but without really looking and seeing the role, the contributions of our perceptions in that. Because ultimately, behavior has to change. If the behavior is saying one thing, no matter what the person's words might be, ideologies might be, but then they are still in the quicksand of a delusion. Because underneath it all, there are certain perceptions, certain wrong views that are functioning. Perceptions that are leading us to look at the permanent, looking at things to be permanent, rather, when they are not. Things that are conditioned from day one. But somehow we want to change that. Somehow we want to change that by continuing to do the same. So it's not a matter of adopting new ideas, new teachings, new dhammas, new suttas, and hoping for that to change the quality of our lives. Hoping to change our lives simply because we've adopted some new teaching. We have to understand that this path requires us to be secluded. It thrives, it grows through seclusion. It doesn't look for masses of people around you. It doesn't look for groups of people to huddle with. There's too much noise there. It's impossible for you to hear your perceptions, to see your perceptions, to identify things as they are, because the views of others around you will impact the way you see the world. It will smudge, it will color your own understanding of the world. Most of us, if not all of us, have been affected by the views of the families we grew up in, societies, ethnic groups perhaps, parts of the world, classes, statuses, etc. Schools, teachers. For the lucky among us, for those of us who have some resilience, to probe more, to look for the truth in it, what's really happening. Sooner or later it becomes clear, but usually it comes at the cost of a few decades already having been spent fighting to find your own voice, fighting to find the sound that's speaking back to you from your heart, saying, there's something wrong here. Haven't we done this before? Haven't we gone through this before? Something does not match. There's something missing. Something is off. And the world is off. The world will always be off whack, disharmonious. The Dhamma is always harmonious, however. The Dhamma never lies. It's always pointing us to how things really are. In other words, where perceptions cannot reach. And for that to take place, we need to seclude ourselves, to allow the roots of this practice to deepen and go deep and really help us to strengthen our understanding of what it is that the Buddha taught in relation to my life, in relation to how I see the world. And the evidence that the roots are going deeper, that you are getting closer to the Buddha's teaching, the word of the Buddha, is simply the reduction in suffering in your life and more understanding, more clarity. Even if that clarity means seeing uncomfortable things around you, seeing how blind the world is. Seeing, in fact, how few are the people who really understand the Dhamma. But this is not about comparison. This is about understanding how things really are. Jnana dasana, to gain the knowledge of seeing. And seeing the connection of our suffering with the presence of perceptions. Now, there's still benefit to perceptions. The Buddha always teaches us to look at using perception in a smart way, in a wise way, in an intelligent way, where you look at things that are conditioned and you look for the impermanent nature in it. Now, you're not infusing something that isn't there already. No, you're highlighting something that is being camouflaged by life, by delusion, by lies. So you're saying, no. There's nothing essential here that's substantially a self, something that is fixed, unchanging, despite what the world says. This is a man, this is a woman, this is a rock, this is a cloud, this is a table. You look and you see there's nothing to put your finger on and saying this is this thing, independent of other conditions. Similarly, you don't look at something that produces suffering and somehow tell yourself, I'm going to extract delight and joy and permanence out of this. No. That's ludicrous. That's crazy. Because you're now able to see impermanence. You're able to see dukkha, suffering. You're able to see non-substantiality of a self in there, within you, within the world, within things that you hold valuable. Ideas, ideals. And then you see that it's all there for those of us who want to learn from it, but to grow out of it, to grow out of suffering, to grow out of samsara. And that completion is in the example of the Arahant, who has cut oneself free from that suffering. But the views we hold will keep us shackled. The views we hold, by views I mean, of course, wrong views, which the Sutta has been familiarizing us with, will continue to keep us in samsara, so long as we are not able to see how things come to be. Yatha bhutang pajanati. Knowing how things come to be. And how do we do that? This is not some philosophical school. This is not, the Dhamma is never a new philosophy. that the Buddha promulgated. It's much more than that. To understand how things come to be means that you are very closely, carefully observing the six sense doors. You're observing how and what is coming to knock at your six sense doors. Your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your body, and your mind. So you are very carefully observing, scrutinizing, in fact, to see whether you have some preferential treatment for certain contacts being made by these six doors versus other types of contacts, where you like to welcome pleasurable feelings and you don't even open the door for painful ones. You try to avoid it. You put a sign outside saying, you know, not here. I don't want to experience this painful experience, this feeling, these sensations. So to see things how they come to be, again, is not going to leave us in a passive state. Last week, I began by, I think I said something along the lines of, who is manning the ship? Who's running the show? Your life. What is running it? Are you there, or are you playing a passive role to the old proclivities, to the tendencies? What is really running it? This thing called life, your life. So for most people, they are unaware. They are simply victims of their perceptions. And when I say perceptions, I also mean, of course, their six senses. Whatever is thrown at them, they will become victims of that or those things. And that's why we have lived throughout samsara just following that method of existence, meaning falling victim to the two ends of the pendulum, running from one to the other, trying to maximize as much as possible by gathering and experiencing pleasant, delightful experiences versus running away and avoiding and shunning the opposite, which is the unpleasant or painful feelings. But essentially, we are caught in this pendulum of samsara, and that is not the Dhamma. The Dhamma teaches us to break that pattern. And that's what the Buddha is guiding the bhikkhus in this instruction, in this sutta. So let us continue on from where we left off. We came to the section, so we finished the first section, of course, the 18 views. Today we will continue from the 19. Well, we're going to start from 19 to 34. Views number 19 to 34. So here we get the big, the previous ones, of course, as I mentioned, were about the past. And these ones are going to be about the future. So you have these views, right? 18 views and 44 views. We've covered the 18 in the previous few sessions we've had. So again, for newcomers, this is the Digha Nikaya number 1, the major discourse that often is misunderstood and avoided completely by so many, in fact, sadly. But we have been extracting so much gold ores, platinum ores, from this wonderful sutta, from this wonderful discussion that the Lord Buddha had. So now we get to the aparanta kappika, assumptions and beliefs about the ultimate end. So these will be the interest of oh, what will be the future? Where did we come from? That's a typical question that a common mind asks, mediocre mind. A child can ask that. But similarly, they can also ask, where are we going? But a courageous mind will say, where am I? What's going on here? What's really happening here now underneath my feet? And that is where the six senses unfold. The six sense spheres are communicating. Life is happening here, not in the future nor in the past. But that's what the lazy mind does, to jump into these two extremes. Why? Because, as I mentioned in the first week and the second week, it's all about the fear of losing the sense of self, which all religions basically advocate, push for, and are trying to preserve in some form or another, or at least advocating its existence. Even an atheist is very much a devout follower of a self, the existence of a self, a presence, an experiencer. And then they just say, oh, it just goes dark and it all goes poof. So there really isn't karma, there isn't really anything to really hope for in the future. So, and many of the teachers, contemporaries of the Buddha already were followers of such, or advocators of such wrong views 2,600 years ago. So there's nothing new that the Western atheists or modern day atheists are offering here. They're all coming from the same basket of wrong views. So let's continue. Furthermore, bhikkhus, one has to consider that there are also many recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins who engage in speculative thinking, as they theorize by making assumptions about the ultimate end that is to come in the future. Soon enough, they turn those speculations into assertions and beliefs, which they then formulate into entire systems of thought, which they claim to be their assumptions about the ultimate end yet to come, based upon 44 premises or frames of reference. And what, bhikkhus, are these 44 premises or frames of reference, which those recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins engaging in speculative thinking apply, while relying upon them as evidence for the validity of their assumptions and beliefs about the ultimate end, which they claim will occur sometime in the future? So this is the first. Sanyivada, remaining percipient beyond death. Wrong views 19 to 34. Here, because there are such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins who assert and believe in the premise that life continues beyond death, whereby the self remains percipient and therefore does not die nor get extinguished. So, to point out that the self still remains percipient after death, they use the following 16 premises as their sources of or frames of reference. Now, what are these 16? Here, because they make the following assertions. After death, the self retains its material form, while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left functioning and intact. After death, the self obtains an immaterial form, while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. After death, the self retains its material form, as well as obtains an immaterial form, while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. So you see there's three different already. One is saying no, there is a material form that is still kept after the death of the person. So these views, by the way, they're about after, once the body is no more. So people have to justify somehow so that they don't fall into this terrible depression or become, nihilistic in a sense, about existence and to just give up, to quit. And many people struggle. And that's why you have many of the religions that showed up that give people that hope. Oh, no, 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 don't worry. We're going to be reborn, or we're going to, even if there isn't a rebirth in their philosophies, in their thinking, in their religion, ways of thinking, they will say, no, but this body will take on another form, but it will be material and it will also be percipient. So you're going to experience everything, but they're going to be so much better. So you have a plethora of religions that today, to this modern day, so-called modern, where you have advocates of that. Billions of people follow one or another type of a religion that advocates for these things, that teaches people these wrong views. After death, the self neither, this is the fourth one, neither retains its material form nor obtains an immaterial form, while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. So here, you don't have a material or an immaterial self, but somehow you're still percipient. Remember, this is all speculative views because nobody's gone there to come back and sit down and say, this is exactly what's happening from these people. They just sit down. As long as there are listeners, they will come up with junk. And that's how religions start, pretty much. Blind faith and people's curiosity, and to get some type of pleasure that stems from the fear of losing the self. So anything that you offer that's going to give them hope, just like people who fight for freedom, liberty, and whatnot, all these ideals. And then you look at other countries that already supposedly have those. And you see crime, you see vice, you see immorality, non-virtue, and you say, like, okay, all these things that were promised, these people, although have these ideals, we supposedly have these democracy, this, that, but it's all corrupt. But these people are fighting for these things still, hoping that they will have this utopian society as a result of gaining the things which these people already have. You look at the third world countries and you look at the supposed first world countries, and you see this discrepancy. And if you're smart, if you're wise enough, you'll see, oh, there's a discrepancy here. People are believing lies. Oh, okay, let me work with this. Let me try to understand. This is when the person really goes beyond what's visible, beyond what is being told, beyond wrong views. Here's a set of wrong views we're going through, by the way. After death, the self stays finite, while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. After death, the self becomes finite, while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. After death, the self itself is both finite and infinite, while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. After death, the self is neither finite nor infinite, but while remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. So again, we have a tetralemma, right? So all these four aspects, finite, infinite, both finite and infinite, and neither finite nor infinite. This is what philosophers love to do, because if anybody chooses one position, if they say yes, they would be saying no to the others. Already you're caught within the dilemma. It's a dichotomy. And all these are the constructs of the mind, of a speculative mind. And that's why it's very dangerous, because you have entire lifetimes lost, because individuals will hold on to a position and will promote that at the cost of the possibility of breaking free from samsara, because these are people who will even question samsara because they have accepted a view. That's why I was mentioning in the beginning how we are slaves, we are captives to our views, to our perceptions. Perceptions are there as a tool, like your legs. Your legs are supposed to take you from a place of danger to a place of safety, where you can go and find security, where you can find food, where you can find your loved ones. Okay? They're not there to take you to the opposite. They're not there to take you to destruction, to fall off a cliff. They're just there for you to really make use of so that you can reduce suffering in your life, reduce the sense of lack, and really come to an understanding that gives you fulfillment. Same thing with perception. It's there as a tool for us to use, not to bury us in delusion, which is what, unfortunately, most people continue doing in the world. After death, the self remains percipient as it was during its life, without undergoing any changes, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. So the personality and everything, these individuals will believe the self will maintain. It will be percipient of its sensory perceptions and everything. So it's fine. It's just the form that has changed. After death, this is another one. The self acquires a different and altered perception that the one it had while alive, while retaining its former faculties, than the one it had while alive, while retaining its former faculties and functioning. So this one says it will have a different, altered perception than the one that it was used to having while alive. But it will have its functioning still. It will function, it will develop on the previous faculties. After death, the self acquires a limited range of perception with some of its faculty left intact and still functioning. So some of it will work, some of it will be different. It will not work, in fact. After death, the self acquires a boundless range of perception with faculties that are transformed, becoming limitless in their functioning. This is what most people love to think about. Once they die, oh, my senses I became hypersensitive. I saw lights. I saw this. I think I was God. All these things people have. After death, the self becomes ecstatic and exclusively happy while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. After death, the self becomes miserable and exclusively unhappy while also remaining totally percipient, with all its faculties left intact and functioning. See the opposite? This one is the exact, exclusively unhappy, is saying. After death, the self becomes both ecstatic and happy, as well as miserable and unhappy. This is a theory that keeps both sides happy. Doesn't want to leave anyone out. While also remaining totally percipient with all its faculties left intact and functioning. After death, the self neither becomes ecstatic or exclusively happy, nor miserable or unhappy, yet it does remain totally percipient with all its faculties left intact and functioning. Now, these are the 16 frames of reference used by such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins as premises for their assertion and claim that after death, the self lives on and continues to be percipient. Therefore, because these happen to be the 16 premises of those who engage in speculative thinking as they theorize and make their assumptions about life after death, whereby they assert that the self remains percipient and therefore does not die nor get extinguished. To this end, they support such claims by basing them upon these 16 premises as their sources or frames of reference. That is so because outside of these 16 frames of reference, there can be none. After all, this itself is the understanding of the Tathagata, who clearly knows and sees that if anyone attaches oneself to and identifies with any one of these premises, it still leads one back into yet another birth, for it surely keeps one trapped within the cyclical becomings of samsara, without any hopes for an escape beyond it at all. Now, the Tathagata is truly the one who finally came to clearly understand this for what it really is, as well as directly know and see the very escape from this. As such, there can be no confusion or uncertainty whatsoever in the Tathagata, as it relates to his understanding of this truth, which is why he has indeed quenched his thirst and attained to extinction. Thus, by fully comprehending the whole process of arising, of falling away, and of disappearing, of the constant pursuit of gratification, the dangers that it brings, and especially the very escape from all kinds of feelings, the Tathagata has truly attained to ultimate freedom, by entirely giving up all grabbing with its tenacious tendency to hold on. Those five, again, are unique to the Dhamma. There's no tradition, no even philosophy that comes close. That's why the Dhamma provides the avenue, the method, the actual way of attaining freedom, because it's freedom from the cyclical process called samsara, rebirth. And this is also terrifying for many people when we hear what Nibbana really means. It means extinction. Extinction of what? Well, of the self, of course. I don't want to go extinct. I don't want to get extinguished. I mean, I have an idea, I have a personhood, I have a this, I am this. This is why people will only get to if they love the Dhamma for some reason, maybe past karmic connections or whatever, they will only allow themselves to get a little bit into the Dhamma, but never penetrate, never come close to really tasting the juiciness of the Dhamma. Meaning to really touch anatta, to really touch non-substantiality of a being, what that means in the teachings. The escape, which is number 5 of this list of the formula, rather. Remember, there's the rising, falling away, samudaya, aptagama, and the adinava, and asada before that. Adinava is the danger, the gratification, the seeking of to be satisfied prior to that. But nobody actually wakes up and says, wait a minute, I keep doing this again and again and again. And I cannot get gratified. There is no satisfaction. That's why craving is always leading me out from one experience to another. So there needs to be disenchantment and dispassion developing in the person in order for them to seek out the escape from this crazy, crazy hamster wheel of suffering. Most people will not want to be interested in this. They do not really want to escape. That's why they hold on to the bells and whistles of what the Dhamma offers, rites and rituals, what looks nice, the soft stuff, the pleasant looking things, the cozy, comfortable feeling things, and never penetrate. Why? Because they know if they penetrate, if they allow themselves to penetrate deeper and deeper, they're going to come to the extinction, which Nibbana is. Extinction of what? Not just the self, but that sense of constant longing, constant running after something, which we call craving. That itself is the source of dukkha. But when you're living in a society, in a world where having craving is in fact a crucial part of being alive, talk about topsy-turvydom. So you cannot advocate, you cannot celebrate craving while at the same time following the Dhamma. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. That's why with every generation, the number of arahants drops dramatically. This was happening even at the time of the Buddha. Not everyone who was shaving their head, wearing robes, going through the motions of being a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni or samanera or samaneri were in fact those things. And today is no different. Not every bald-headed person walking around with a bhikkhu robes is in fact a bhikkhu. Why though? It has nothing to do with the Dhamma. The Dhamma reveals. But in order for the Dhamma to reveal, we have to have our eyes open. If something is being revealed to us, but we have our eyes really, really closed shut, we're not going to see anything, are we? Therefore, bhikkhus, these are the teachings, the ways of understanding reality, which are extremely deep, truly difficult to comprehend, let alone to penetrate and come to see and appreciate their depth and scope. For they are indeed excellent, so sublimely peaceful, beyond anything the mind could conjure up, utterly transcending the confines of logic. In fact, they are so beautiful in their subtlety that they can only be realized by the wise, that are few. Now, this itself is what the Tathagata has himself revealed, having realized it through his own direct experiencing and penetrative insight, and he now shares it by introducing and making it known throughout. To this end, anyone who truly and sincerely wishes to pay homage by praising the Tathagata, venerating and offering him accolades properly, would be doing so rightfully while considering and basing his reverence upon these irrefutable facts. Remember, the first week we went over the various different things, the appearances, again, like I said, the bells and whistles that people love, attractive. Oh, they do this. Oh, look at the sila. This Lord Buddha picked sila and said the Putujjana will see different levels of sila also, right? And they will show reverence and veneration to the Buddha because of them, the Putujjanas, seeing these attributes in the teacher, in this case, Lord Buddha. Because of that, they will pay homage to the Buddha. And Lord Buddha was essentially criticizing that as being a debased, an inferior form of paying homage to a teacher. But remember, Lord Buddha taught the Dhamma for 45 years. And he didn't have to teach for 45 years if people were really, really alert and understanding. Because people are so thick-headed, it doesn't go through. To this day, 26 centuries later, we still are doing that Putujjana business. We look for those things to identify, that's a teacher, that's a bhikkhu. Why? How do you know? Well, because everybody else is saying they are. Okay. How do they know? Delusion upon delusion upon delusion. But the Dhamma doesn't lie. There's nothing uncertain about the Dhamma. Just like Lord Buddha was saying, the knowledge and understanding, penetrative insight of the Tathagata is not based on uncertainty, but it's certainty of his experiencing of it. Well, his experiencing of it also brought about what? The Dhamma, the revelation, the revealing of the Dhamma to the world, the rediscovery of the Dhamma to the world, which also is all about certainty. The Dhamma is not uncertain. The practice where this leads to is not an uncertainty. There's no speculation about it. That's why it's beyond rites and rituals, which are cheap tricks that people always resort to because it's attractive. 7. Asanyivada, no longer percipient after death. This is the next category. Wrong views number 35 to 42. Here, bhikkhus, there are such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins who assert and believe in the premise that life continues beyond death, whereby the self, although not dying nor getting extinguished, and thus remaining forever, nevertheless no longer stays or becomes percipient again. So, to point out that the self no longer remains percipient after death, they use the following 8 premises as their sources or frames of reference. Now, what are these 8 frames of reference used by such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins as premises for their claim that after death, although the self lives on, it no longer continues to be percipient? Here, bhikkhus, those recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins make the following assertions. After death, the self exists and retains its material form but is no longer percipient. After death, the self exists by acquiring an immaterial form but is no longer percipient. After death, the self exists and retains both its material form and acquires an immaterial form but is no longer percipient. After death, the self, which continues existing, neither retains its material form nor obtains an immaterial form but is no longer percipient. After death, the self stays finite but is no longer percipient. After death, the self becomes infinite but is no longer percipient. After death, the self is both finite and infinite but is no longer percipient. After death, the self is neither finite nor infinite but is no longer percipient. Now, these are the 8 frames of reference used by such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins as premises for their assertion and claim that after death, the self lives on but is no longer percipient anymore. In some traditions, you have this. I don't want to name the religion, but if you've studied religions, world religions, you see that there are some traditions that talk about being dissolved in this God figure, in this godness, into like a drop. You have, and human beings have always come up with some romantic, terms to describe these things, right? All based on speculation, of course. They never admit that, but things like being lost in the God element, into the small me, this dissolved in the big me, or the God and the Maha into this, like the drop went into the ocean. So the drop no longer is the drop. The self is dissolved, and the drop itself no longer is percipient of being a drop, because now it's part of the big ocean. Okay? But what is happening underneath it all is the perpetuation of some form of a self. You pushed it all the way into eternity, and good luck finding the edges of that. Why? Because it doesn't exist. The person made it up. Why? It's all views, wrong views. Therefore, because these happen to be the 8 premises or frames of reference which are used by recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins who engage in speculative thinking, as they theorize and make such assumptions about life after death, whereby the self does not die nor gets extinguished, while they assert it becomes non-percipient. To this end, they support such claims by basing them upon these 8 premises as their sources or frames of reference. That is so because outside of these 8 frames of reference, there can be none. After all, this itself is the understanding of the Tathagata, who clearly knows and sees that if anyone attaches oneself to and identifies with any one of these premises, it still leads one back into yet another birth, for it surely keeps one trapped within the cyclical becomings of samsara and without any hopes for an escape beyond it at all. Now, the Tathagata is truly the one who finally came to clearly understand this for what it really is, as well as directly know and see the very escape from this. As such, there can be no confusion or uncertainty whatsoever in the Tathagata, as it relates to his understanding of this truth, which is why he has indeed quenched his thirst and attained to extinction. Thus, by fully comprehending the whole process of arising, of falling away, and of disappearing, of the constant pursuit of gratification, the dangers that it brings, and especially the very escape from all kinds of feelings, the Tathagata has truly attained to ultimate freedom by entirely giving up all grabbing with its tenacious tendency to hold on. Feeling is another thing that people cannot live without. So we give it this post-mortem status. We give it these nuances, godlike this, divine this, heavenly this. But essentially, we're saying feelings will go on. You go and browse and shop around different religions, you will see this. This means that the person in their delusion, while being alive in a body that seeks to gratify itself with delightful experiences or feelings, is not in any way, shape, or form ready to give up feelings. And that's the point here. Also, craving is always going to have an advantage on us. Remember, craving is not something out there. It's not even in the world. Craving is within the delusion that is there in our thinking, in our approach, in our heart, if you will. Why though? What am I craving? I'm craving for more pleasant feelings. So people have come up with ideas, assumptions, based on the fact of death. Death exists, it's undeniable. Everybody's going to die. Everybody. From the most powerful villain in the world, or villains, to the kindest person you see on the street. Everybody's going to die. So people had to come up with ways to negotiate their craving with the very big, fat, giant presence of death. That's unavoidable. That's undeniable. It's inevitable. Everybody's going to get it. But there's this longing we have to perpetuate existence, my desires. If you were to anthropomorphize a cemetery, it would look like, if you've ever been to a fishing dock or a ship, I've seen images and footage of ships, fishing ships, or I think that's what they're called, where people would have all these fishing poles, and then the fishing line would be into the water, right? And sometimes I remember I used to go to both on the Mediterranean and also in the US, in places like Santa Monica or Long Beach in Southern California, Los Angeles. And you would see individuals who would have their fishing line in the water. So they had tossed it and they would have the fishing pole attached to something on the dock. And they would be sitting there, reading a book or listening to something. But their fishing line is in the water. They're very much wanting to make sure that they are hooked to the ocean. So think of a cemetery being the same thing, because people's cravings did not die with the body. So imagine all these invisible lines from all of these blocks, tombstones, from all these people that are buried underneath. Same thing with all those who are, cremated, of course. Everybody's got their fishing line attached to another world, another world, another world. When one Brahmin came to ask Lord Buddha about his confusion, because he saw that every other teacher out there at the time was claiming that their students who had reached apparently perfection, their teacher would say, oh, my student is reborn in this realm, reborn in this realm. But there was a problem with the Lord Buddha's attitude about that, because Lord Buddha would tell people, and it was known, that all of his students who had not attained perfection, meaning arahantship, he would say where they are reborn. But when it came to the arahants, he would be quiet. So Vajragota, this Brahmin, came confused. He said, Bhante, I'm sorry, Master Gotama, why do you not tell us? He didn't understand. The whole point of craving being that, and to the point where we see him asking questions pertaining to the new life. What happens after death? And Lord Buddha even says to him, giving the analogy of the fire in a forest fire. And you can tell Vacchagotta is not that, is not simple-minded. He's able to think. And he says, Master Gautama, in the case where there's a difference, there's a distance between one forest and a source of fire, and over there's some trees. How would you describe the fire that's being carried over from here to there? What is the vehicle? What is the fuel? He says, the wind. And if you ever studied science and earth sciences, you appreciate the knowledge that Lord Buddha had about the natural world. But then connecting it to what is really going on with the person dying and their next birth, when probed further, Vacchagotta finds out from the Buddha that it is craving itself. That is the fishing line. That's the hook that's connecting us to the next life. And you don't have to have the ability to, the Dibba Chakku, the divine eye, to see life to life to life to life, to see what's happening and to get disgusted by the whole process. You can simply look at your own life while you're alive. And you look at the various different experiences that we have on a daily basis, where there's disappointment after disappointment after disappointment, where craving comes and says, don't worry, we'll have that. Don't worry, we'll have that. Yeah, I wanted to get some food. I was hungry. So I ate a full meal and now I'm stuffed. I can't move. Oh, okay, don't worry, there's a soft bed. Let's go and rest there. That's going to be the best. Okay, so you sleep. But the person is completely oblivious because a few hours ago, he or she was very hungry. Craving came and said, don't worry, there's this beautiful restaurant. They have the favorite dish that you like. Let's go there. Oh, yeah. You go. Why? Because you're seeking gratification. You do not see the danger in it. Definitely, you're not interested in finding an escape from it. So you don't need to see your future lives or your past lives to figure out this thing that you are undergoing already. That's why this path is for the wise. General Siha, who became a noble disciple, he did not have special powers, other than being a powerful general, but very smart, intelligent, with his feet on the ground, very grounded. Every single thing that he heard from Lord Buddha, he said, yes, I see that. I see that in life. I see that. He understood the Dhamma without having had a glimpse of the next life or about devas. Yet he became a noble disciple of Sotapanna. He saw the Dhamma. He had the Dhamma eye. He was established in the Dhamma firmly, based on what he observed from his life and cross-reference it with what the Dhamma was teaching him. Because the litmus test is always the reduction of suffering from our lives, not the addition of a sense of belonging or being part of a group or having new ideas to promulgate, to teach people or to write a book about or convince people or teach people while you have no clue of what that experience is, which in most cases is the world of Dhamma teaching. Not just now, by the way. Thus, by fully comprehending the whole process of arising, of falling away, and of disappearing, of the constant pursuit of gratification, the dangers that it brings, and especially the very escape from all kinds of feelings, the Tathagata has truly attained to ultimate freedom by entirely giving up all grabbing with its tenacious tendency to hold on. The grabbing is extremely important because You see it almost everywhere in the suttas where it says, through no longer grabbing, upadana is the opposite, the grabbing. Anupadaya ye rata. They delight in giving up and not grabbing. Hinasava jutimanta teloke parinibhuta. They extinguish, they destroy, eliminate the asavas through no longer grabbing. So if there is grabbing, how are we going to eliminate the asavas, the contaminants of the heart, the influxes? How? We cannot continue tenaciously grabbing onto anything. And remember, this was the thing which was that aha moment for even the chief disciple, Venerable Sariputta, when he sat there and listened to Lord Buddha giving an instruction to his nephew, Sariputta's nephew over there, the late disciple. And he saw how Lord Buddha was completely unattached to the Dhamma. The king of the Dhamma was revealing the Dhamma to this young man who was there, presented himself, asking some questions. And as his nephew was attaining to the first stage of awakening, Venerable Sariputta attained to arahantship. Simply because he was present, clearly observing. This is key. You cannot be a part-time practitioner of the Dhamma. You cannot be an intellectual about the Dhamma and expect yourself to get what the Dhamma is. You cannot be like those armchair professors or philosophers. The Buddha was never such a person. None of the arahants were. None of the noble disciples were, in fact. It requires engagement. It requires the basic engagement is dana, generosity, but also, obviously, it can't stay there. You have to practice sila, but it can't stay there either. You still are within Putujjana land. You have to allow it to deepen into samadhi, bhavana, mental practice, cultivation, watching, sati and sampajanya, walking, sitting, standing, lying down, and every moment in between, every junction point in between. And then you're curious, you're trying to see how do things fit. You're looking at craving itself. You're no longer listening to Bhante Candana here talking about craving, trying to convince you of anything, because you're seeing craving. You're craving. And you're seeing how it is relentless. The tiniest little opening, and boom, right there. The asavas are there to take over. If you do not see what's happening, if you do not see how Lord Buddha says, he had that wonderful quality. When Venerable Ananda was listing the other qualities of Lord Buddha is, previous to his birth, at his birth, and after his birth, and Lord Buddha comes in later on and says, what are you guys talking about? And Ananda says, okay, in that case, Ananda, remember these wonderful qualities of the Tathagata. He says, the Tathagata knows when the thought arises, when it sustains itself, and when it disappears. The Tathagata knows when a perception arises, when it sustains itself, when it disappears. The Tathagata knows when a feeling pops up out of nowhere, and it stays, lingers, and then it disappears. Remember that, he says, Ananda, as a wonderful quality of the Tathagata. Can you do that? It's a wonderful exercise. I guarantee it, you will definitely have sati and sampajanya all the time. And you will be able to taste the Dhamma. There's nothing uncertain. There's nothing wishy-washy. There's no eel wriggling, flip-flopping here, as we saw last week. Therefore, bhikkhus, these are the teachings, the ways of understanding reality, which are extremely deep, truly difficult to comprehend, let alone to penetrate and come to see or appreciate their depth and scope. For they are indeed excellent, so sublimely peaceful, beyond anything the mind could conjure up, utterly transcending the confines of logic. In fact, they are so beautiful in their subtlety that they can only be realized by the wise, that are few. Now, this itself is what the Tathagata has himself revealed, having realized it through his own direct experiencing and penetrative insight. And he now shares it by introducing and making it known throughout. To this end, anyone who truly and sincerely wishes to pay homage by praising the Tathagata, venerating and offering him accolades properly, would be doing so rightfully, while considering and basing his reverence upon these irrefutable facts. 8. Wrong views 43 and to 50. Let's see if we can finish this section. Neva sanyi na sanyi vad, neither percipient nor non-percipient after death. Here, bhikkhus, there are such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins who assert and believe in the premise that life continues beyond death, whereby the self, although not dying nor getting extinguished, and thus remaining forever, is neither percipient nor non-percipient. So to point out that the self is neither percipient nor non-percipient after death, they use the following 8 premises as their sources or frames of reference. Now, what are these 8 frames of reference? Here, bhikkhus, those recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins make the following assertions. After death, the self exists and retains its material form, but is neither percipient nor non-percipient anymore. After death, the self exists by acquiring an immaterial form, but is neither percipient nor non-percipient anymore. After death, the self exists and retains both its material form and acquires an immaterial form also, but is neither percipient nor non-percipient. After death, the self which continues existing neither retains its material form nor obtains an immaterial form, but is neither percipient nor non-percipient anymore. After death, the self stays finite, but is neither percipient nor non-percipient anymore. After death, the self becomes finite, but is neither percipient nor non-percipient anymore. After death, the self is both finite and infinite, but is neither percipient nor non-percipient anymore. After death, the self is neither finite nor infinite, but is neither percipient nor non-percipient anymore. Really is like open-ended. Could be anything. You know? Now, these are the 8 frames of reference used by such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins as premises for their assertion and claim that after death, although the self goes on existing, it is nevertheless neither percipient nor non-percipient anymore. Even the self that is present within life. So these are individuals that very much, as I was saying in the beginning, I think, the self is a reality. It's unquestionable. That's why Lord Buddha's voice was unique and very much alone in India at that time. People did not like the Buddha, did not like the teaching that he was sharing, because everybody had built all these ornamental things around this Christmas tree called the self. Well, what if you take the self away and what's left? Everything falls down. So they didn't like the fact that Lord Buddha was teaching anatta. That's why they mistakenly came to their own conclusions, saying, oh, the Buddha teaches annihilationism. If you remember from a few years ago or last year, we did the Vairanja Sutta from the book of the 8th Anguttara Nikaya, where this major Brahmin comes in and accuses Lord Buddha and says, you teach annihilationism. And Lord Buddha says, I do teach annihilationism, but not the way you understand it, or you're accusing me of. And the Brahmin goes, what? I teach the annihilation of this thing you call an ego, this craving, this ridden identification that you have, that this is me, this is who I am. If that's what you mean, yeah, I also teach the annihilation of anger, of hatred. I invite you to go and read that sutta or listen to it, or watch our exploration of it we did a few years ago. Therefore, because these happen to be the 8 premises or frames of reference which are used by recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins who engage in speculative thinking, as they theorize and make their assertion. To support this, to this end, they support such claims by basing them upon these 8 premises as their sources or frames of reference. That is so because outside of these 8 frames of reference, there can be none. After all, this itself is the understanding of the Tathagata, who clearly knows and sees that if anyone attaches oneself to and identifies with any one of these premises, it still leads one back into yet another birth, for it surely keeps one trapped within the cyclical becomings of samsara, and without any hopes for an escape beyond it at all. Now, the Tathagata is truly the one who finally came to clearly understand this for what it really is, as well as directly know and see the very escape from this. As such, there can be no confusion or uncertainty whatsoever in the Tathagata as it relates to his understanding of this truth, which is why he has indeed quenched his thirst and attained to extinction. You cannot glorify that thirst which you have done. You see it being done, that is, by people, by formulations of different philosophies, including in Buddhism, where they came up with this whole bodhisattva ideal to perpetuate the thirst for rebecoming, to ennoble it in a sense, by going against the teachings of the Buddha himself. This is what happens when people do not practice and they're too lazy. That's what happened. It didn't start with the Mahayanas, by the way. It started already within what I'm calling now the Theravadins, even though that term didn't exist then. There was just a bunch of people, a bunch of groups of practitioners. But already they were not practicing. That's why they were too busy coming up with different theories and ideas instead of practicing. Because if the person is doing the practice, you don't have time for views. Because there is samaditi, not michaditi, which we've been dealing with here. Wrong, evil views. The practice is very simple. The Noble Eightfold Path. It starts with right view. Right view is what? The voice of another, meaning the teaching, and having yoniso manasikara, placing the attention where it's supposed to be, meaning contact. Your 6 sense doors are your best university ever. Now, how often are you able to stay there at any of these doors? That's why most people have ayoniso manasikara, wrong radical attention, unwise attention, basically. And if you have that, wise attention, that is, then everything else that follows, it will be correct. You will have right intentions, you will have right speech, you will have right behavior, right actions, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi, which will give you right liberation. You don't have to conjure up anything after that. You have people today saying they will die and they will come back, reincarnate, and these are supposedly Buddhist, reincarnate into another form which they will choose beforehand so that they can help, even though they're awakened, to help other people become enlightened. Complete nonsense. Has no place in the Dhamma as taught by the Buddha. If a person is an arahant, that's what we mean by enlightened, awakened, perfected, there's no way they could come back. Even if they are first grade awakened, meaning noble disciple number 1, Sotapanna, they have at the most 7 if they are extremely lazy. 7 more, not indefinitely, keep coming back. Yeah, I'll be this, I'll be over there. You go send me this group of monks to go find me over there in that neck of the woods. No. If the person really had the ability to see their past lives, they would see they came out of hell, and that's what they're headed for, making such ludicrous statements, misrepresenting the Dhamma that was taught, the perfect, beautiful Dhamma that was taught by the Buddha. This is a path of crossing over the flood. You don't pitch a tent in the flood. Lord Buddha said even the raft, the person who's smart enough and needs to cross the flood will build himself a raft, and once he crosses over, he will not carry the raft over his head. This is in the Alagadupama Sutta. He drops it because he made it. Why would he need? Why would he need? Not even a stupid person would do that. Or at least build a house or a hut with it, with the raft, with the reeds. But that's what we have. People have completely misused the Dhamma to perpetuate the thirst. And if there is thirst, then there is craving. If there is craving, you're far away from being awakened. And there's no way of ennobling the thirst, craving, because that is Mara's land. You're talking Mara's language in Buddhist terms. People have to be awake to see what's really going on in the world. Anything that gets you pushed away from seeking seclusion to really test and practice, to taste the Dhamma, they are practicing Mara. They are advocates of Mara, even if they are wearing robes. And all those idiots who follow those. Because they are not practicing Dhamma, they are practicing Adhamma, which we have a lot of today. That's why we're doing these suttas, so that people could come back to the Dhamma to see what Lord Buddha really taught. Really. Therefore, because these are the teachings, the ways of understanding reality, which are extremely deep, truly difficult to comprehend, let alone to penetrate and come to see or appreciate their depth and scope. For they are indeed excellent, so sublimely peaceful, beyond anything the mind could conjure up, utterly transcending the confines of logic. In fact, they are so beautiful in their subtlety that they can only be realized by the wise that are few. Now, this itself is what the Tathagata has himself revealed, having realized it through his own direct experiencing and penetrative insight. And he now shares it by introducing and making it known throughout. To this end, anyone who truly and sincerely wishes to pay homage by praising the Tathagata, venerating and offering him accolades properly, would be doing so rightfully while considering and basing his reverence upon these irrefutable facts. Let's see here. Maybe I can do this section too. Okay, number 9. Uchedavada, annihilationism or nihilism. Wrong views, number 51 to 57. I'll stop after this. Here, because there are such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins who assert and believe in the premise that after the breakup of the body, at death, the once existing being is extinguished, obliterated, becoming thus fully non-existent and no more. Modern day atheists, or anybody who follows that reductionistic, so-called scientists. So to point out that the self is fully eradicated and annihilated after death, they use the following 7 premises as their sources or frames of reference. Now, what are these 7 frames of reference used by such recluses for their claim that after death the self no longer exists and thus becomes extinguished, obliterated, fully non-existent, and no more? Here, because some of those recluses make the following assertions. The self, sir, has a definite form and shape, and is composed of the 4 primary and fundamental constituents, 4 elements, think of it, and it is produced by the joining of father and mother. Now, once it is dead, however, this very self is destroyed, extinguished, and obliterated. This, therefore, is how, after death, at the breakup of the body, the self becomes fully annihilated and non-existent anymore. Thus, this is how some of these people claim that the self becomes non-existent and fully annihilated right after death. Then another person comes along and refutes that assertion by adding his own while claiming, the self, sir, as you stated, does not exist after death. This much is true, and I cannot deny it, because it is a fact. I love it when they claim that it is a fact, you know. However, its extinction does not come about, and it does not get fully annihilated the way you explain. Instead, there is another self that manifests, which is divine in its form and attributes, with full access to the sensual realm, sustaining itself by consuming physical edible food. Now, this fact you obviously are neither able to see or to know nor see. I, on the other hand, both know it and see it. So this is how after death, at the breakup of the body, the self becomes fully annihilated and non-existent anymore. This is also how some of these people claim that the self becomes non-existent and is fully annihilated right after death. Then yet another person comes along and refutes that assertion by adding his own, while claiming, the self, sir, as you stated, really does not exist after death. This much is true, hence I cannot deny it, for it is a fact. But that is not how its extinction takes place and how it gets fully annihilated. Instead, there is another self that manifests in its place once death has occurred, which is divine in its specific form and attributes, with all of its minor and major limbs and organs intact and fully functioning faculties. This body, so basically you're getting a new, it's like turning in your car at the dealership at the end of a lease, at the end of, you give your car to the car dealership, and they give you a new one, a new version from the other end. So this body, however, is mind-made. Hence it is created and fashioned by the mind. Now, this fact you obviously are neither able to know nor see, but I both know it and see it. So this is how after death, at the breakup of the body, the self becomes fully annihilated and non-existent anymore. This also is how some of these people claim that the self becomes non-existent and is fully annihilated right after death. But then, of course, someone else comes along and makes yet another assertion altogether while stating, the self, sir, as you stated, really does not exist after death. This much is true. Hence, I cannot deny it, seeing that it is a fact. However, that is not how its extinction takes place and how it gets fully annihilated. Instead, there is another self that, while remaining fully aware of how space is infinitely boundless, is reborn into the dimension of boundless infinity of space. This because, by no longer paying any attention to the multiplicity of unending perceptions, it has already completely transcended and gone beyond the confines of the physical world and of tangibility, along with the disappearance of perceptions dealing with sensory reflexive contact. Now, of course, this fact you are neither able to know nor see, but I, nevertheless, do know and see. By the way, this is a description of the infinity of space where that is experienced by a meditator when they are going into the jhanas, specifically the arupa jhanas. So that is presumably, we can say, what such a person would be coming from to validate their claim. But again, they have really solidified that as an actual thing that's happening with dimensions, with this. Even the boundlessness of space is a thing for these people. Okay? So this is how after death, at the breakup of the body, the self becomes annihilated and non-existent. And then someone else comes around and makes yet another assertion. The self, sir, as you stated, really does not exist after death. This much is true. And so they say that. However, that is not how its extinction takes place and how it gets fully annihilated. Instead, there is another self that, while remaining fully aware of how consciousness is infinitely boundless, is reborn into the dimension of boundless infinity of consciousness. This because it has already completely transcended and gone beyond the confines of the perception of space being boundlessly infinite. Now, of course, this fact you are neither able to know nor see, which I, on the other hand, both know and see. And this is, by the way, the following arupa jhana. You can call it number 6, arupa, or formless jhana, attainment, absorption. So this is how, after death, at the breakup of the body, the self becomes fully annihilated and non-existent anymore. And then someone else comes around and they makes yet another assertion. The self, sir, as you stated, does not exist after death. This much is true, hence I cannot deny it, as it is a fact. However, that is not how extinction takes place and how it gets fully annihilated. Instead, there is another self that belongs to the dimension of nothingness. Having attained to it by experiencing and being fully aware of how there is only nothingness and nothing else. This because it has already completely transcended and gone beyond the perception that takes consciousness as infinitely boundless. Now, of course, this fact you are neither able to know nor see, which I, on the other hand, both know and see. So this is arupa jhana number 7 that they're describing. Now, of course, there are also the realms, equivalent realms, where individuals who have attained these jhanas and like to stay there, dwell in those jhanas, and they have an attachment to it, then, and if their karmic, I guess, actions, merits allow it, and they die in the right state of mind, and they still maintain this craving for this level of attainment, most probably they will end up in this realm, the dimension of nothingness. But again, it is temporary. Further, another person comes along as well and makes yet another assertion. Says, yeah, as you stated, self does not exist after death, but that is not how extinction takes place. Instead, there is another self that has ever even gone beyond the dimension of nothingness and is reborn into the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, having previously experienced it as, this is peaceful, this is truly sublime. Now, of course, this fact you are neither able to know nor see, which I, on the other hand, know and see. So this is how, after death, at the breakup of the body, the self becomes fully enlightened, annihilated, and non-existent anymore. So this also is how some of these people claim that the self becomes non-existent and is fully annihilated right after death. By the way, the last two were the states of attainment of the, well, Siddhartha Gautama's teachers, Alarakalama and Uddakaramaputta, respectively. They were in those, they were teaching, and they had attained to these realms. One to the realm of nothingness, the other one to the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. And that's why Lord Buddha did not teach, did not set the wheel of the Dhamma in motion by first teaching his former teachers, because they had already died. One the night before, and the other one a week, 7 days prior to his awakening. And he couldn't go to those realms to teach because they are non-percipient. They are unable to process anything, let alone to understand the Dhamma. So they're non-percipient. So these are these philosophies were advocated by such individuals. Well, that to this day people practice, and they call it, oh, that we've attained arahantship. Meanwhile, it's not, sadly for them. These, therefore, are the 7 frames of reference used by such recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins as premises for their assertion and claim that the once existing being totally ends beyond death, whereby the self is extinguished, obliterated, becoming thus fully non-existent and no more. Therefore, bhikkhus, these happen to be the 7 premises or frames of reference which are used by recluses, religious practitioners, and Brahmins, who engage in speculative thinking as they theorize and make their assumptions about life after death, claiming that the self no longer exists and thus becomes extinguished, obliterated, fully non-existent, and no more. To this end, they support such claims by basing them upon these 7 premises as their sources or frames of reference. That is to say, that is so because outside of these 8 frames of reference, there can be none. After all, this itself is the understanding of the Tathagata, who clearly knows and sees that if anyone attaches oneself to and identifies with any one of these premises, it still leads one back into yet another birth, for it surely keeps one trapped within the cyclical becomings of samsara, without any hopes for an escape beyond it at all. Thus, now the Tathagata is truly the one who finally came to clearly understand this for what it really is, as well as directly know and see the very escape from this. As such, there can be no confusion or uncertainty whatsoever in the Tathagata as it relates to his understanding of this truth, which is why he has indeed quenched his thirst and attained to extinction. Thus, by fully comprehending the whole process of arising, of falling away, and of disappearing, of the constant pursuit of gratification, the dangers that it brings, and especially the very escape from all kinds of feelings, the Tathagata has truly attained to ultimate freedom by entirely giving up all grabbing with its tenacious tendency to hold on. Because remember, as we were talking about the first and second weeks of the Brahmajāla, feeling is at the bottom of, no matter how academically, scholarly, minded the person is, or however theorizing they're involved in, however much, to sound like they're aloof, they're really smart. Bottom line is, it's all a cover. It's all a deception. It's all a ruse to protect a certain feeling. And that feeling usually has to do with perpetuation of the self, which has to do with the fear of losing that self. So people come up with their theories to justify what really is going on underneath. And that's what we will see, hopefully next week, when we finish the few wrong views that are left. And then we jump into the Buddha explaining exactly what the noble disciple does in this dispensation. Meaning they reveal the connection of feeling, specifically in terms of how the 6 sense spheres, the 6 doors that I said, the contact is playing by him repeating tadapi pasapachaya. That too, by every single one of these, Lord Buddha is going to mention briefly, and he will say, this too is dependent on contact. This too is dependent on how the person is feeling underneath, which is basically a cover-up of that feeling. Imagine human beings throughout spending their whole life to defend a position simply to cover up the fear of death. Ultimately, that's what it is. And the fact that they have lived deludedly at the mercy of craving, running away from painful experiences towards pleasurable experiences. It's very sad. To this day, we see all these powerful people, or people we maybe even respect and appreciate or valued in the past. That's what it is. Poets, writers, all these people, leaders of whatever community movements, when you look down deep enough as to how they lived, what they did really, beyond their writings, beyond their speeches on podiums, there's fear. And theories have even come up to perpetuate an alternative, to extend, to give that eternal, foreverness, happily ever after scenario. Open-endedness, perpetuation. It's all childish. But for the Putujjana, that is the real deal. And that's why the Dhamma is not for everyone. The Dhamma is definitely not for Putujjanas. That's why the Dhamma is dying. The light of the Dhamma is going out because the ratio is too great of people who are interested in the superficial, in what is eye-catchy, in things that people could see, can be impressed by, emotionally feel certain things towards. That is what a child does. So the Dhamma is for real grown-ups, plain and simple, who have matured and want to mature and to cut themselves out of the cycle of rebirth that drags us back to suffering. Therefore, bhikkhus, these are the teachings, the ways of understanding reality, which are extremely deep, truly difficult to comprehend, let alone to penetrate and come to see or appreciate their depth and scope. For they are indeed excellent, so sublimely peaceful, beyond anything the mind could conjure up, utterly transcending the confines of logic. In fact, they are so beautiful in their subtlety that they can only be realized by the wise that are few. Now, this itself is what the Tathagata has himself revealed, having realized it through his own direct experiencing and penetrative insight, and he now shares it by introducing and making it known throughout. To this end, anyone who truly and sincerely wishes to pay homage by praising the Tathagata, venerating and offering him accolades properly, would be doing so rightfully while considering and basing his reverence upon these irrefutable facts. And we'll stop here. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Even though there's only 4 more views left, 58 to 62, I think it's better to continue from there next week. You probably might have guessed why this sutta was neglected, pushed at the bottom drawer, maybe covered, maybe sealed shut somewhere in people's minds. And so we always ignore. Well, the same thing if you notice with the Mulapariyaya Sutta, the first of the Majjhima Nikaya, which we've done several months ago. But there was a reason why these powerful suttas were selected as the premier sutta of their individual collections. Mulapariyaya for the Majjhima Nikaya, middle-length discourses, and the Brahmajāla Sutta, the supernet of wrong views, as the first of the Digha Nikaya, the long discourses of Lord Buddha. Because they hold the code, they have the key to really, not like they are in any way the suttas to follow or have hidden messages or something. Nothing is hidden. Nothing in this Dhamma is hidden. Nothing is secret. That's another thing. The Dhamma cannot live in secret societies, in secret agendas, secret plans, whether it's ours or other people's. It's open. Lord Buddha said, I teach you with my palms wide open. I don't keep anything back. But unfortunately, people, because of their delusion, they elected to not look for what does the Buddha mean by this? Is it really about just other people's wrong views, other traditions' wrong views, or is there something here? You go around the world of supposed Buddhist circles around the world, and there are some certain sacrosanct terms like Nibbana or Nirvana. Okay, what is that? It usually involves the state of being after death. Well, how is that different than other religions? Really? And their advocacy, their claim that there is a God waiting for you over there. In fact, in Buddhist traditions, within Theravada, they came up with a Buddha land. That's where the Arahants go to. That's where the sun doesn't rise, doesn't set, the moon doesn't set, but there's light, there's this, but there's no darkness, there's this. People started to even conjure up ideas and images. Commentators were responsible for this. And so it's so easy to fall because you're dealing with the procrastination, the laziness to be honest in your probing and falling back instead to the way you usually would process information, would understand the world. This is why curiosity is extremely important. And this is why it's extremely important to have access to the Dhamma proper, the suttas, not commentaries about the suttas, which have become, and in fact, sacrosanct. They are the source. They became the primary source, and the suttas became the secondary source, which is terrible. People know about, let's say, Visuddhimagga more so than they know about, if I give them a name like Sankitta Sutta, they don't know what that is. They don't know what the Buddha was talking about. Or when I say, this is the famous one, right? Kalama Sutta. Oh, yes, that's the Buddha saying that, you have to question this and that. Yeah, but what do you know about the Kalama Sutta? Most people have no clue. So we cherry pick things and we build our delusional ornamentations go around it, just like I was mentioning that metaphor of a Christmas tree. Because we don't like to spend energy. And where do we need to spend it then? If not on the Dhamma, because the Dhamma is, we are so fortunate that we have found this thin thread of the Dhamma. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. But in order for you to not lose it, you have to apply what you're learning. It's not an accessory to add into your life while you maintain the life that you've had before, unchanged. The Dhamma is not, trinkets and things that you add more pizzazz into your life. No. It's very down to earth. And it's beautiful because it changes and transforms your life right here, right now. But it takes work. You cannot do it passively. It requires your active involvement. Not even participate, you have to be actively involved, just like you are in the process of your breathing. You do not breathe, you die. That's why we explore the Dhamma, so we gain a clear understanding for ourselves and improve the quality of understanding, and the perceptions become less and less. I'll stop here and see if there are any thoughts, comments, questions. No questions. I think you're being too kind. You don't want me to keep talking, I guess. But if you do, just okay. Let's transfer some merits. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Lokasasanam. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Desanam. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Mamparanti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Ask yourself, what do you take refuge in really? Every time you take refuge. Really. Nobody other than yourself can be honest about providing the right answer. And don't, if you know, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, these are the sources, the triple gem in which we take refuge. Yes. But they represent honesty. They represent truth. Truth. How we live life. Please don't take it in some person that existed 26 centuries ago and what that person taught 26 centuries ago, or the group of practitioners that existed 26 centuries ago. That has nothing to do with you then. Really. The thing that we take refuge in has to be relevant to us right now in this life that we are living. The difficulties, the challenges we face, the questions we have, the successes, the failures, you name it. But you cannot go on living any kind of life, whether based on Buddhist principles or not, while living inauthentic lives and still claim to be living a fulfilling life. So please be honest with yourself, with your practice, and why you're practicing. And how far do you want to go? In essence, remove the limiting factors, the glass ceiling of your progress. Shatter it. Don't wait for others to come and shatter it for you. They will thicken it, in fact. I will stop and until next time, may the Triple Gems blessings be with you in your practice, the quality of your practice. And please remember to be approaching the practice with a sense of ease, not a fight. We are the happy ones, Lord Buddha says in the Dhammapada. He didn't have to say it, people already saw it in him and in his community of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, so, and lay people, of course. So until next week, Sukhiyot.